Hi, Mary and Rick. Sure, all my phones are quiet. Anita and Aviva, are you guys waiting to unmute until the very moment? Is that what? Okay. So you can laugh and got it. Perfect. All right. We'll give it one more minute and then we'll start and people can jump in after at the end. I grab my water bottle quick, actually.
Anybody else they're waiting for?
There might be.
Hi, Irina and Marv.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you, Marcia?
I'm good. Are you settled in pretty much, or?
Yes.
I guess so. No, I think as far as what we're going to unpack, we've kind of unpacked and got that settled in. Because we're hoping that this is just a year here. So probably next May or June, we'll try to find something else, that might be more permanent than renting. But we have to wait for God to reveal some of those other steps yet. So we're just waiting, Brad, I was also going to mention to you, or anybody who is interested in some more discussion. I was on Right Now Media the last few days. There is a session. I think it's a 6-week session or 6-session thing by Tony Evans on embracing one. Embracing oneness, I think. It is really good. He's an African-American pastor in Dallas. And boy, he's got some really good things on there. So it might be something that you want to check out too.
Yeah, thanks. That's good to hear. I've had some people forward me some really good stuff, and that's great. The more we can, the purpose of these calls really is to educate and just get ourselves ready to have the conversation, continue the conversation, and ultimately go forward from these calls to be able to take some action and do things too. So that's really good to know all the options that are out there. So
yeah.
Good. Well, thanks again. I think we'll start. I just want to thank everybody for being on here again. I'm excited. In particular, we've had some really good conversations. If you haven't been a part of them in the past, they all are up on YouTube. So we've had some other good dialogues with some other individuals from church. I am really excited tonight, in particular, for, as I shared with Anita and Aviva, everybody else who has shared so far has been a little bit older generation. And so I'm really excited. It's been a fun process for me, and it's going to be really fun to hear from them. Really, the generation that's younger than the rest of us, right? So the younger generation, and as we discussed a little bit earlier, and I won't steer the offender to let them talk about it, but it's very interesting because we've had some older generations who have been days after the civil rights movement, even in the midst of it, have experienced racism to that degree, and now our society has advanced a little bit, but in advancing, we've then just become more subtle in our racism, and so the type of thing they've experienced is maybe different, but certainly not any less damaging and not any more real. And the reality is that's where we're fighting the battle right now when it comes to racism. Is it kind of in a different? We maybe don't have quite as many sit-ins as we once did, but the racism is still very real, and the ways to address it are just as critical. So if you don't know Aviva and Anita, Aviva is actually on church staff right now. She's our social media specialist and has been involved here and does a fantastic job. I really enjoy working with her. And Anita is also one of our youth leaders. And I was on the verge, before COVID hit, I was on the verge of sending my children with her across the globe. So I have a lot of confidence in Anita and everything she's got to say too. So again, appreciate, I think most of you guys have been on here before already, but we do, for the most part, just myself and Anita and Aviva will have our microphones on so we can mostly control the conversation. They will do most of the talking, but I'll maybe prompt some questions here and there. And then if you feel like you really have a question that you wanted to ask, you can send that to me in a chat. And if we have a chance to get to it, I'll chime in. But definitely as follow-up happens, I would encourage any of you who are listening and have some thoughts that come about regarding racism, maybe even send me an email later, because I do expect these. Right now, we've mostly just been listening and getting perspectives, and I think that's a really important first step in this process. At some point, we'll have some more open conversations where people can ask questions, and we can still, in a very safe and loving manner, but address some of the things that we just all really struggle with and don't know how to go forward with them. So anyway, so all that to say, as I have for the other meetings, I've asked Anita and Aviva to kind of come prepared with some thoughts about, I feel like as we make this real, and again, in particular, as we talk about the next generation, the way we really grasp the how heavy racism still can be is to know people and address it on an individual level. So I've asked both Anita and Aviva to share an individual instance that they have experienced in their life, really where racism was targeted towards them or something they felt as an individual, and then some things that they've seen systemically, whether it's any experiences they felt like it's been difficult to get through and get the same sort of respect or the same opportunities just simply because of the color of their skin. And so we're gonna take some time with them sharing some thoughts about that. And they had some other really good thoughts, and we'll just kind of go from there as far as the conversation goes. So again, Nita and Viva, whoever wants to go first, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Brad. I'm gonna start. I'm Aviva, like Brad said. So basically, one of the big things that I've always struggled with was being in a biracial family. So my mom is white and my dad is Black, but I grew up mostly with my mom. So I was more in whitely targeted neighborhoods, and that was always a struggle for me because I never really knew where to fit in, because the white kids were saying like, oh, you're a little too Black to like be in our friend group, and the Black kids were saying you're way too white because of the way you talk, the way you act, and where you live, that to be like a Black person. So even growing up really young, I really always struggled with like who I was as far as my skin color, because I always thought I was Black based on the color of my skin, but everyone else was telling me, like, you're not really Black, but you're also not really white. So that's something I always struggled with really young. But the main thing was that I was always the token Black friend, which is a term that's very common for our age group. And it normally means, it's kind of like, so I grew up, again, in the more whiter neighborhoods. So then people would say like, oh, well, like, I have a Black friend, and it would be me. So I would be their only Black friend, and therefore they would call themselves cultured because they had one friend that was quote unquote Black, but then again, they said I wasn't really Black. So that was something I've always struggled with, because people would say, oh, well, you don't have a Black friend. And then they'd say, oh yeah, I do. I have Aviva. And it was like, are you being my friend just because of the color of my skin to say that you're cultured? Or are you being my friend for who I am, regardless of my skin tone?
For mine, kind of about race, kind of not, but in middle school and high school, I have always been asked about my voice and that I speak white or I talk white. And that to me was always confused me for the longest time. I didn't know much about that. But the more I grew up, the more I realized that they said I talked white because I talked proper. And I didn't use slang, and I don't shorten my words per se. And that's what they meant by that. And it was a struggle for a little bit, because when I hung out with my Black friends, they're kind of like, you talk white, you're not really Black and all of this. And then when I hung out with my white friends, they're kind of like, you're kind of a little too Black for us. So it's kind of like I told them earlier, it's an identity thing, but not so much like, I know I'm Black, but more so where do I fit in, and what's that about? And now in college, I'm more, I appreciate it more that in the Bible, it really talks about identity, and it doesn't say anything about the way I talk. It doesn't say it has anything to do with what my friends think I'm supposed to sound like or look like, and it has nothing to do with what society's standards of what my identity is. And in the Bible, it's clearly in there, and throughout it, we got to hear it. So now as an adult, I feel more confident in that. But another instance just where I kind of felt it was a little off was I go to St. Kate's, and that's a private college. And I know one day my friends were picking me up and driving me wherever, and they kind of said, Anita, how do you pay for your school? And they're kind of like, it's kind of unfair that you get all these scholarships for being a minority. And I was like, that completely disregards my academics, other scholarships, grants to help pay for school. I like to say student loans don't discriminate. So we're kind of all in the same boat there. And just just comments like that. And it was kind of played off as like a joke. And I was like, that has some deep issues with as a statement. So those are just two instances I thought of
And
for tonight.
Yeah, for sure. I think definitely that's also something that we both struggled with, which is why we talked and brought it up, because I go to North Central, which is a private Christian school, and I get a lot of the times like questions like, oh, you go to college? And it's kind of like that for me was always a shock, because it's like, yes, so I'm like any other 20-year-old, I go to college to get a degree. But especially when you put the words private and Christian in front of it, like not only are they surprised that you're going to school, they're surprised that you're going to a private Christian school. And then again, it goes with like, oh, well, you're lucky, you probably get more loans than anyone else, or you get scholarships. And it's like, you're downgrading all of the hard work I put into getting those academic scholarships, they don't even see how much you work behind the scenes to pay for that college. And it's not loans. Like I have friends this semester who got more loans than I did. And it's like, it's not just based on the color of my skin, it's based on like our parents' income. So that has nothing to do with skin color at all.
And then we kind of just had a discussion on just kind of with our generations, it's more so just comments that kind of bring up the race issue. So we talked about how a lot of times people are surprised that our parents are still together. I've had friends drop me off at my house and say, wow, you live in a house? Assuming that I lived in an apartment or like a townhouse. And I grew up in North St. Paul, so I'm right over there. And it's a white neighborhood, and people would just be surprised that that's where I grew up and where I lived. We had other examples.
One thing that I always got to, or maybe Anita's seen some friends go through it, is I have younger siblings, and whenever I'm in the grocery store with them or my parents walk away for 2 seconds, someone will come over and say, oh, your kid's really cute. Or people ask me, I think the first time I was 16 years old, when someone said, oh, how many kids do you have? They didn't even know who I was, and they were assuming that I had children, because that's what goes with our skin color, is we have kids really young, when it's not really the case anymore, I would say. But so definitely things like that, where strangers will come up out of nowhere and just say like, oh, how many kids do you have? Or, oh, your kids are really cute. And it's like, if you took 2 seconds to just wait until my parent comes back, you would see like they're not my kid at all.
Yeah. Or even in school, kind of just like grouping, I guess, all Black people into a group. And I've been asked if I celebrate Kwanzaa in front of my class, and I'm like, nope, that's not a part of my history or heritage. And just like comments like that kind of slide, or is just an assumption instead of let's ask in a safe space if this is something that applies to you.
Yeah. We definitely had 2 big comments though that we get a lot. One of the big things for me that I get is, you're the whitest Black person I know, which is solely based on, I think, just my actions and the way I talk. I've never really understood it. My dad spoke for the racism conversation with Pastor Mike, and afterwards I talked to him about it, and he was like, Aviva, that is so racist in itself that people don't even realize. For you to say like, I'm the whitest Black person that you know, well then what does a white person look like, and what does a Black person look like for you to be the whitest Black person? And that's something, I just got that comment 2 weeks ago. It's from someone close, a close friend, where I would not think that I would get that comment from them. But you know, it still happens to this day.
Another comment we've both received is, if we're with friends and let's say they just listen to more rap music. I don't really listen to rap as much as others, but they'll just be like, I'm Blacker than you, Anita, because I know this artist, and I've been to all these concerts. And I'm like, I don't think liking rap is tied to any one race. But just kind of dealing with those comments, or people will say certain things are ghetto, and when you ask them what they mean by that, they don't have an answer for that, because they learn and realize that that's very stereotypical and is kind of based towards a race. That's not necessarily true. So those are just a few of our examples.
Yeah.
Those are all great. Thank you. I think, like we talked about, those are all they feel more subtle, but like you said, they're really rooted in. That's the problem systemically. We've got these roots that have built comments upon, and the comments themselves can feel so benign, but deep beneath it is a perspective that we're all holding when it comes to interacting with with people who are different than us, and so you mentioned siblings. Anita, I didn't prepare you for this, but I was going to ask you this question, so sorry I forgot to tell you. I was thinking about it, but when this all just happened with George Floyd, I was talking to James about it, and it's at church here, and we were discussing racism and everything, and then out of the blue, like James said, yeah, I just talked to Anita, and she said that they just had to have the talk with her younger brother, and I'm thinking like, her brother's 13 and they had to have the talk, and I'm thinking like he's talking about the birds and the bees, and I'm like, I'm like, James, is a pretty harsh change in topics, but okay, whatever. And it was the first time I had realized that the talk for a young African American boy was how you interact with police officers, and having to be prepared for what that's like as a Black person, and which obviously was very, very pertinent in the wake of what happened with George Floyd. And so, do you mind? I mean, again, putting you on the spot a little bit regarding your brother, but the idea that growing up with siblings, or even, I don't know if yourself if it feels quite as strong for an African American woman, or if it's mostly just the male, but mind commenting a little bit on what that's like, kind of growing up with that concern?
So with my brother, the talk wasn't something that like we had to start from the very beginning. I mean, he's on social media, he has friends, he can see the news. So it's kind of just questions branched off that. And I think for a 13-year-old, that is a lot to take on. I know when this incident specifically happened, like it was easy to imagine that was my uncle or my dad, or, I mean, my brother was 13, but there's even other cases of kids younger than that dying. And so I think it sucks, honestly, having to have that conversation and saying that in this world, there are people that won't even get to know your name, get to know the sports you like, know what you do outside of your life if you volunteer or anything, and there's just going to be assumptions purely based off how you look like. So you need to hold yourself to a higher advantage. So I think with my brother, it was a little easier because he kind of just knows what's happening, but it was still something that it was like, we shouldn't even be having this talk to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's kind of what you mentioned.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I'm just curious. Again, I grew up the police were always the good guys. So very, very foreign to me to think about that you have to be prepared for a police officer that, you have to be frightened when, not that you're excited to get a ticket, but worst thing that's going to happen when the police officer pulls you over is you get a ticket. Right. But so this is the reality that there's fear that comes with, I think is again, systemically, that's a major problem in terms of trust. I think that's, sorry, now I'm going to preach for just a minute, but I feel like, really truly addressing our society's issues, we can't go forward without some bit of trust being formed. The bridges that we're talking about, as far as, and it's just not there. And I understand, hopefully everybody who knows what's going on understands why it's not there, but there's not trust from Black men that a police officer is going to treat them well, and there's equally maybe not trust from the police officers that they're going to get away without, with even the good police officers have concerns like this Black man is afraid of me, and so he's going to grab for his gun in his glove box faster than somebody else would, and so you just have that edginess that comes with all these hurts that haven't been healed and keep coming up, and which is why I think, and maybe Anita and Aviva, you guys can talk to this a little bit now since we discussed it earlier, but that's where I hope conversations like this, trust builds at a very small level. It's at the individual level, getting to know the people around you, maybe making a point of, I'm sorry, I got a couple questions for you, but getting maybe to a certain regard, I grew up in a very white town, very small town, Minnesota. And so when I went to college, and not that I hadn't clearly seen minorities before, but it was really truly the first opportunity I had to get to know and be friends with somebody who was a different race than me. And so there was like almost a deliberate, like, if I'm going to grow in this, I need to go out of my way to meet somebody and get to know somebody. But the flip side of that, then all of a sudden I heard this term of my token Black friend. And I thought, well, I don't want to go be somebody's friend and make them my token Black friend. And so maybe you guys can speak to sort of like, how do we navigate that, people are making assumptions about the holidays that you celebrate, and they're making assumptions about your skin tone and where you're coming from. And those aren't appropriate assumptions to make. But at the same time, to get beyond those assumptions. You really need to get to know somebody. And how do you get to know somebody without being able to be free with it's just a really difficult thing to get over those assumptions and not turn you into my token black friend. But at the same time, if I'm going to get to know you, I've got to ask you questions that are your experience is different than mine. And so, again, I was all over the place in that, but if you guys have any thoughts about how do you feel when you feel like somebody's treating you like a token black person, but how those of us on the flip side of it, how do we get to know you without asking that, making you feel like we're just using you for our own purposes,
Yeah. I would say just on the whole token black friend person thing, one of the main things is like I said before, like, are you getting to know me, or are you using me as like, oh, well, now I have a black friend, or now I know a black person that's not like how they're viewed everywhere else. And one of the main things is, like I said, like getting to know me for me. If you are you come to me and you're like, oh, like she's actually fun. I would like to think I'm fun. But it's like, going and saying like, because of her personality, that is why I wanted to get to know you more. Or not just solely based on like, well, she's black, so I need to have more black friends, or I want to be, I don't know how to word it. You just like want to be friends with like people who are, I think that's a big thing that we're going to bring up later, just on like, starting with the people in your group, starting with the people in your neighborhood, in your city, but don't get to know them just because they're black. And this goes outside of just even black people. Don't get to know the Muslim people in your neighborhood just because they're Muslim. Get to know them for who they are, and then that takes away the whole token black friend.
And I think a lot of times people like to say, I have one friend that's kind of different from me, so I'm one and done. And just being on the same page of, again, your experience with them, and what they may say doesn't speak for their whole group in its entirety. So just branching out and knowing that, you shouldn't have just token friends to just check it off, but being genuine with it too, and making sure it's coming from a place of like authenticity and not necessarily just so you could say you did it.
Right. Yeah, and you guys talked about that a little bit earlier. Maybe this can segue into some of the points you wanted to make, but obviously one of the things that's happened with everything just being raised to the surface now, you have a lot of people who are looking for you to, all right, and Aviva, what should I do now? And looking for you to give all the answers, and looking for you to be the source of information. And I guess what's a good way to go about doing that without, I can't imagine it makes you feel good if people are making assumptions about your skin tone and what that means about you and everything. So what's a good way for somebody to try to get educated and not be rude to you guys as individuals and get to know you?
Yeah, good question. I feel like the first thing that me and Anita really talked about, as Christians, we need to spend time with God in this. So if it's breaking, and just saying like, God, whatever breaks your heart, I want it to break my heart too. And that's the very first step in all of this, because you can view it one way and I can view it a different way. She can view it a different way. But until we all say, God, like, what's breaking your heart about this situation, and help it to break mine so I can see it and view it the way that you do. That's one of the biggest things that we wanted to share with you guys is we could tell you to go read this book or go watch this movie, but until we are one-on-one with God, we're never going to see the changes that he wants to make throughout all of this.
And also kind of piggybacking off that is we can recommend you to go volunteer here or show up here, but ultimately God's going to put you in better places than we could ever offer. And he's going to walk you into conversations and walk you into people's lives where you can make an impact and have that conversation if it's a safe space or safe conversation. So really, we were just encouraging people to make your heart be genuine and in a place of where Jesus is going to be in the center of it. And then we also said that educating yourself was a huge thing. And these conversations are awesome, but there's also other great resources and books and studies and et cetera to look at. And then after that, have a conversation with people from there about any issues that you have questions about. So we were talking about redlining earlier, about how certain communities are where they are because of that, and just kind of, it's hard to pull things out of the blue, but if you have some background with it, it'd be helpful.
Yeah, definitely educating yourself before going to someone and just saying, I'm so sorry that this is happening. What can I do? Educate yourself and say, I learned that this, and happened. Like, how do you view it? And like, there should be more dialogue than like, what can I do? Because I feel like the only person who can give you the answer on like what you can do is God. And that again comes with like seeking him and saying like, God, break my heart, and how can I change this?
Yeah, man, that's good. That's very good. Aviva, I had a really good question, and then you said that really good point, and you totally threw me for a loop. Now I can't remember what my question was going to be. Oh boy, you guys have some other comments you want to keep going with while I think of what my good question was?
One thing, we spent a good amount of time talking about this, and we said that Pastor Mike has done a really good job of getting straight to the point. And it was this thing with guilt and repentance. And we just kind of had to talk about guilt is not going to get you anywhere. Feeling bad, I mean, is one thing, but it doesn't have any action steps behind that. And how repentance means I know what this is, and I'm choosing to deliberately turn away and walk away from it. You should check out his sermon because he does a really good job, better than I could explain it. But how that's a real thing. We were talking earlier and how we don't necessarily feel guilty that Jesus died. We're not just like, oh, that sucks and I feel bad, but it's, I know what he did, and I'm every day it's a step to change my ways and love him. So just throughout this whole thing, just realizing where you are on that, and that feeling guilty is one thing, but repentance for yourself and with others is a whole nother subject.
Yeah. And another thing too, just a lot of the younger generation, after everything happened, it was kind of more of like Black Lives Matter, or this whole situation was some sort of movement, or it was trending. And for a Black person, like that was just kind of tough, because it's like every day we have to wake up and face these battles. Every day without someone saying, I support you, we have to get up and face these things. And so for it to be kind of a trending thing, and people were tagging us on Instagram, like tag 5 friends who care about Black Lives Matter. And it's like, we're Black, obviously we care about it, So that's like one thing. If we're going to call out our generation, we're going to say like, stop posting about it and do something about it. It's the same thing. You could say, I'm a Christian, and post Bible verses every day on your story or on your Instagram or on your Facebook. But if you're not digging into the word, if you are not serving and doing, like living out God's calling for you, it's like, what good are you doing? Are you really supporting this movement, this trend? Like, is Jesus a trend? It's kind of going back to that on like, it kind of hurts as a Black person when you're like, for that 1 month after he passed away and everything happened, everyone was Black Lives Matter, like all of that, but then they go back to their lives until something like this happens again. And it's like, we need to be a generation that's not just like, every time this happens, then we'll get out and speak about it. We should be doing stuff every single day to make it better.
Yeah, and I think it was just interesting navigating that. There's a difference between like performative activism and kind of, you can post anything and forget that you even posted it, but are you going into these communities? Are you reaching out to people? Are you meeting people where they're hurt and broken? And there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of hurt and brokenness in the city, and I think there still is. So are you meeting them right where they're at? And I mean, posting it is great and all, but just kind of action steps behind it is kind of what our generation wants to see and is kind of about.
Yeah.
That's good. Actually, that was kind of my question. You kind of answered it already, actually, but I was curious about, I've been a little amazed isn't even the right word, but some of the responses that I see from white people on Facebook, or I try not to get too wrapped up in Facebook anymore, because I discovered it wasn't helping anything. But like there is just this anger, just this furious anger from some white people, and I think like a righteous anger is important, because as Christians we are called to fight for justice, and so that to me is different than what I'm talking about now. Is people just like really white people who are hating other white people because they're so furious, and it feels a little, I don't know, I'm curious how do you, it strikes me as very peculiar, I guess, and we've seen a whole wide range of African Americans who demand that white people are apologizing to them, and some people who are demanding, well, I didn't even want you over here helping us because you don't know what it's really like, and you kind of have the whole big spectrum. And I'm curious, maybe the answer is what you already said, is just who's doing something about it. But how does that sit with you when you have how's a good way for somebody else, another race, in particular white people, being in the majority here in the United States and in power generally, what's the best way then for us to come with you in a very real, meaningful sort of way, where it's not just anger filled and I don't know, it just seems disingenuous to me sometimes, but maybe that's meaningful. I'm asking, is that meaningful to you? I guess how does it mean something?
I would start off by saying, for me, when I know that like I have friends, white friends in my friend group or whatever, that actually see me for me and not just my color, and those people say like, you're doing this, I want to support you, that means more to me than someone who I haven't talked to since high school saying like, what can I do? It's like, I don't know. I don't even know what you're doing with your life right now. I can't tell you like what you can do. So I think having those deeper connections, like we said, like finding those people in your group or in your neighborhood and getting to know them deep for who they are, just beyond their skin color, just getting to know them and building relationship with them. And then once you have that relationship with them, then saying like, if they're going and supporting this or they're going and doing this, like say, you know what, because I know you, because I love you, I'm going to go and do these things with you. Not just because you're a Black person, but because we are friends, there's a deep connection there, and I'm going to do it with you.
I'm going to agree with you that Facebook is a weird place to navigate
Right.
as of late. But in terms of posts and stuff that were on there, in terms of like, because you were kind of getting at that white people were sometimes angry at each other or sometimes not, and just kind of like the content of what they post. And I think, one, hopefully the post is out of love, but something that I've been reading lately is just this form of privilege, and privilege as across the board of like an advantage of anything, or people will listen to you. So if friends are advocating on behalf of those that have talked forever and just haven't been heard, that's something that I found really insightful. And a lot of times that wasn't directed at everyone, but most are like their family members or the people in their lives that they wanted to impact. So again, it was not a larger scale of let's yell at everyone, but let's talk about the people in my life and that I care about. So that's just more on like Facebook posts.
Yeah, that's good. Actually, so I speaking of the wisdom of Facebook, I have one more question that I'm going to ask, and then I think I'll stop using Facebook as a resource for at least tonight anyway. But I've asked this to a few other people, and I'm really curious on these calls, and I'm curious, maybe generationally, if there's a difference, because especially Aviva, you kind of keep, I think very, very appropriately keep highlighting like, just care about me as an individual, who I am. It's not about my race. And so when this very first happened with George Floyd, one of the quotes I saw on Facebook, it was, the statement was, innocent Black man was killed by a corrupt white police officer. And the quote underneath it then was, this is the cure to racism. And then the words white and Black were crossed out. And so cure to racism is simply to say, an innocent man was killed by a corrupt police officer. And don't worry about, it's not about he was Black or he was white. It's just about, it was a corrupt police officer who killed a man who should not have, certainly anything he was guilty of was not it was not justifiable of what happened to George Floyd. And so I struggle with that a little bit, because I thought, yeah, that is in some regards a better perspective, let's not highlight the reality. Like, the main issue of that one individual situation was a corrupt police officer did something awful. Then I also think, well, is that just a kind of convenient way to sweep the reality of racism under the rug if we just pretend that it doesn't exist by crossing out the Black and white words in there? And so, but I keep thinking of that, Aviva, as you're talking about, just really wanting to be viewed as an individual and not as a token Black person. And so I feel like there's this tough conflict of how we navigate that in regards to addressing racism. And not that, you guys have any, it's a little philosophical maybe off the bat without preparing you for it, but if you have any thoughts about it. Does that insult you to just cross out, in that phrase, to just cross out black and white and think that fixes racism? Did that offend you more, or does it actually give you a little, yeah, maybe that's a good way to view it?
I think I'm kind of in the, you really got us, Brad.
That was the goal, yeah.
I think personally for me, like on my heart right now, to see it crossed out after everything that's happened, that hurts, because it's like, oh, well, the fix to racism is taking out the color. It's like, yes, sure, take out the color, but then it goes to like the police officer himself. Did he take out the color? And if he didn't take out the color, it's a racism thing. So put the colors back in.
That's good.
Because if he didn't see George Floyd as a Black person, then yeah, sure, take out the color, and it was a corrupt police officer and an innocent man. But based on what had happened, it doesn't look like it was just an innocent man and a corrupt police officer. You have to put the colors in there.
I would say I see what the point is, but I think it also misses the point completely. And we haven't really addressed the race issue enough for us to completely say, let's just forget about it.
Yeah.
And I think until we really dive deep into what happened and how that's just a thing in America, we can't decide to just ignore it when it's still a real issue that we've never really addressed.
Yeah. Okay.
That's good. Those are really good answers. Definitely. I like that. That was insightful. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think I do think eventually, again, just as I'm kind of brainstorming in my own mind of how to go forward with some of these dialogues, Anita, you really touched on sort of that discussion of privilege, and that's something I would like to in the future. Those of you, especially those of you who keep kind of plugging in here, I'd like to take a step in the direction where we can have a dialogue about what privilege means exactly and how, because I think that's I spoke with just yesterday, I was talking to a Black woman and she was actually really insulted at the term white privilege. Like, just even that phrase states that you're better because you're white, that, not now society, there are issues that are providing privilege for people societally that need to be addressed. But the phrase of white privilege for her, she does really offensive to me. Like, you're just in that statement saying that since I'm Black, I can't have white privilege, and that I'm at a disadvantage in terms of just who I am. And so, but I feel like most of the systems that we're talking about, the repetition you mentioned, the redlining and those types of historical things, do lend to some bit of privilege that exists in our, like you just said, Anita, we haven't addressed racism enough to sweep it under the rug yet and cross out the colors. And so those privileges are part of what needs to be addressed. And so I would like to have a conversation at some point about, because then on the flip side, I am as privileged as they come in my life. I grew up in a very provided for family, and I recognize that some of the things I have in my life are because of nothing that I did, which is simply where I was born. And so, but I used to feel guilty about that for a little while, and then I recognized that it doesn't do you any good, like you said, to feel guilty about it. And so it's more about identifying that and how can we fix that and make it an even playing field. And so acknowledging it, sharing, some of the people who are whatever you want to call the privilege, who have that privilege, to discuss some of the thoughts they might have, what it means to try to get rid of it, and that kind of stuff, I think is an important step in the process. But so thank you for letting me think out loud at that very moment. But go ahead.
But yeah,
say something, Aviva?
Yeah, I was gonna actually go off of that whole privilege thing. I think, well, I have 2 points. I think I will agree with you. When I grew up, again, with the biracial, I grew up with a white mom in a white neighborhood. The Black people, that's again why they wouldn't accept me, because they were like, well, you're privileged because you're not 100% Black, so you would probably get more things than we would, and your mom's white, so therefore you're doing better. But it's like they didn't see all of the dysfunction, behind just the color of my skin and the color of my mom's skin. It's like, just because the color of your skin, it doesn't mean that I'm more privileged than Anita. It's like the roles could be completely reversed, but people miss the whole point just because of the color of your skin. It's like, I know multiple Black people who are way more privileged than I would say I am, you know, but it's at the end of the day, it comes down to like, what is your definition of privilege and how are you using that to better yourself and others, you know what I mean? So like you said, you grew up in a white neighborhood and you feel very privileged, but you felt guilty, but now it's about repenting and like not feeling bad for that, but how can I create a better world because of what I experienced?
And I think it also kind of dives deep into privilege, also kind of goes, I mean, white privilege, but then there's just privilege in general. We talked earlier about school districts in general and how some inner city schools are less funded than suburban schools. And because of that, they have access to better resources and computers, and they have access to go on college trips, and they're still expected to compete to go to the same college. But it's like if they also had a tutor and had all these amazing opportunities, then it's like a level playing field. And that's just one thing. That's the school system, and there's more into that.
Right.
And so again, that's not necessarily based off race, and then you can go into redlining about where people live, but in general, that's just an educational disadvantage. Where someone has a privilege of, if you were in a great district, you have a great outcome. And that was just my one example. But
yeah, no, that's Marcus Montana shared that on our very first call. The middle school, junior high that he went to school at funneled into, I don't remember the districts that they were in, but funneled into a different high school. And some of the other middle schools that came into that high school, they had been in 8th grade, they had been offered Algebra 1. And so when they got to high school, they could take Algebra 2. Well, the high school that he was at, there was no algebra class. And so you came in as a 9th grader, simply because of the school you're in, you were a year behind educationally from all of the kids who had come from the other place. And all of a sudden you don't have the opportunity to do Algebra 2. So then you can't get to trigonometry, and then you can't, just even that simple of a 8th grade high school class offering, how much of an impact that can have going forward in terms of educational abilities and college classes and opportunities. Like you said, there's a lot of those issues that it's more about privilege of opportunity, and then that can come back to race simply because of the foundations of some of the neighborhoods and, again, redlining types of things that are generational. But it's more clearly about opportunity than race itself, for sure. I'm super excited. I'm really encouraged. I'm excited about. I love it. So, not that I don't mean to be ending the call. We can still keep talking if you guys have some things to talk about. But I just have to. As we talked about all these generational things, I've just got to say I'm so encouraging for me to be able to be a part of every one of these and see how things progress, and then to know that the reality is the major changes that are going to happen because of Anita and Aviva and your friends and your generation. Like we're getting to that point now where, your generation is going to be taken over, and this is the world that you guys are going to be creating. I'm excited to be helpful in that process, but it's fantastic to hear you guys just talk very clearly about things that need to be addressed. And it's really encouraging to gives hope for the world that my children and grandchildren will grow up in, and that kind of thing. So. Yeah, no, thank you guys. So do you have other things on your mind that we didn't get a chance to touch base about? I would love, well, go ahead, I'll just leave it with that. Do you have some other things that we missed that we had talked about earlier?
One thing that you talked about earlier, you asked about the talk, having the talk, and then you said, what does it mean to be like a woman of color? Woman of color, and a Black woman of color. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. But I wanted to touch on that. So you were talking about like getting pulled over, or like what would happen. And for me, growing up, like I didn't have the talk. My dad's Black, but he just never thought it was like a thing that we needed to talk about, So like he talked to my brother that's a year younger than me about it, but he never talked to me about it because, it's not a big deal. But the first time I got pulled over 2 years ago because I was speeding, I was scared out of my mind because of what's shown in movies and what's all over the news, and the fact that he had to talk with my brother, but he didn't have to talk with me. It's like, okay, I know I need my license and my registration, but I don't know what's going to happen. I'm shaking, and it's like, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what was going to happen. And the police officer was very upset with me because I was speeding. He has every right to be upset with me. I was speeding down the highway. But I was just like, is this how police officers talk to you? Like, I just don't understand. Like, this is nothing like the movies. Like, I don't understand what's happening, you know? So like, I think that it's still like, a lot of people think it's just Black men that have that problem, but I have family, again, being biracial, my mom's side of the family lives in rural Wisconsin, where I am still scared to this day to go into stores by myself, because I'm like, I know that there's probably no Black people here, and I will be the first one that walks in. And then you get the stares and the looks. And I mean, I've been stopped or followed in stores because I look like I'm gonna steal just because of the color of my skin. A big thing too, my first semester of school, I went to lacrosse, UW lacrosse. It's in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, very tiny. Again, you know, just went there to get away from the family, thought I was an adult and could do things by myself like every 18-year-old does. And the first day I moved in, I realized, I looked online and there's 1% of Black people there, or 1% of anything but white. So the school of like 10,000, I was 1% of anything but white. And I was like, that's fine. I came from Burnsville, Minnesota, where it's 30% anything but white, you know? So I was very cultured, and my roommate also came with me. So we were very on the same page of like, we're fine. Like, we don't see each other for color. We see each other for who you are. And the night that I moved in, someone wrote the N-word right outside of the bulletin, scratched it into the bulletin right outside my room. And so that was a big culture shock for me, because I was like, this is not normal. There was two people of color in my whole entire dorm of like 800 people, and it was me and someone else I went to high school with. So it's like, we were very much on the same page of, I don't see a problem with it. But to be in rural Wisconsin, it was a huge big thing where like, I wasn't expecting that. And I had to move back home second semester because of other reasons too. But I was just like, the culture shock was way too much for me to say like, I think I can stay here by myself, because my roommate was white and she was making friends left and right. And people would walk into the room and just not even see me. Like, I wasn't there. They didn't want to create conversation with me. I didn't make any friends. She was making all these friends. And I was like, it has to be because the color of my skin. You know, she was getting invited to do all these things, and I was just sitting in my room, and I would hang out with the other Black person, and that was just about it. So I think a lot of people say, something that bugs me is people say like racism still isn't real to this day. And to that, I tell them, it's not how it was. Me and Anita kind of talked about this. It's not how it was when 70 years ago. It's not how it even was 50 years ago, but it is still here today. And it's more in comments or actions that are more passive, but it's still there.
Yeah. I'm kind of piggybacking off her college experience. For me, when I was searching for my college, one of the questions after I had my list was, how diverse is your school? And some schools couldn't even give me an answer, and like they didn't even have a percentage on it. The school I go to currently is 40% people of color, so that's a huge thing. And my whole thing was, I want to be at a school and on a campus that looks like the world around me. And on one hand, in America, it's majority white, so I guess that would hold true for some. But there's so many different cultures and people and languages, and that's just something that I deliberately wanted to be surrounded by. So I do hear stories like Aviva where some people are one of the few and they have terrible experiences like that. But just kind of with college, like that was just something that was deliberate on my mind. Going back to her, sorry, I'm going backwards from what she talked about, but the talk that we had, and how I didn't have a talk with my mom about like police officers and stuff, but I did have a talk with my friends about how we're scared to get pregnant, and the rates in the medical field of Black women that die during birth because doctors don't believe that they're in pain as much as they should and don't take them serious because Black people just like being loud and have an attitude. And those stereotypes, not true, cause people to die. And how for us, we're like, you know, if we get pregnant, we want to go to a hospital that will take us seriously, or we want a doctor that's not white so that at least we have a good chance of being heard. And that's just one talk that with our friends in passing. And that's something that, I have a while to wait for that. But like, that's a scary thing. And I mean, that might even in my head just make me want to push that back more. But yeah, there is stuff in the medical field where it's like, they just kind of let it slide. You said mentioning people following you in the stores, and I think at the Makewood Mall they had a rule that if you're in a group bigger than 5, you had to break up. And me and my cousins would be in a group bigger than 5, obviously break up, but then we would see white people in groups with their friends, families, walking with people more than 5 and not right by a security guard and not even get pulled apart, or feeling like if we walked into a store that they were watching us, so we had to buy something to prove that, we didn't have any bad intent in there, even if we just wanted to look around. So that was just me commenting on some of the things she said. I took some notes. So
yeah, I had no idea. That's terrifying to think about that as a Black woman going to give birth. I hadn't never heard that or even clearly considered that as far as being something to be concerned about. Aviva, did your dad have a talk with you after you got pulled over for speeding about, or was it just because you were speeding you got in trouble, or did you have to have a talk about how to interact with
No, I didn't have a talk about how to interact with the
Okay.
police officer. My dad did not care about the police officer. He said I deserved whatever I was being talked to because I was speeding 9 over and definitely deserved that ticket. It was more of, you're paying for that ticket. Have a nice day at work. We'll talk about it later.
Got it. That's funny.
So yeah, but I mean, piggybacking off of what Anita said about the whole like medical thing, like another thing too is whenever I go into doctors' offices, they just automatically assume a lot of things. I've done drugs, I've drank alcohol, all of those things. Just, I'm guessing based on the color of my skin and my age, I guess we're 20, we're in college, and it's just normal to say like, when was the last time you drank? And it's like, what? Yeah. Or like, they just assume that you've done a lot of things. And that's something I've also really always struggled with too. I remember when I was in lacrosse, I was having these horrible stomach pains. Figured out I just was really backed up, but she made me go through pregnancy tests, made me go through all of these things and made me spend all this money when I was like, I just have a really bad stomach ache. Like, that's all I'm telling you. And she's like, well, based on like X, Y, and Z, we need to do all of these tests. But the first thing she made me do was a pregnancy test, even though I told her there was no way I was pregnant, still made me take a pregnancy test just to make sure. Then I had to do a CT scan to make sure there was nothing in there too. So it's like crazy things like that, where it's like, I had to spend over $300 when all I really needed was a laxative. So it's crazy, but like, that's what the world that we are living in right now.
Yeah.
Friends in the medical field or realm, and just hearing experiences, even just from other people that I know in passing, about how if they want a doctor to do a test and the doctor denies it, they will ask, well, put that in my chart that you denied it. And this is just as advice, and the doctor would then come back later and say, you know what, actually, let's do it. Because they don't want to explain why they didn't offer you the test or wanted to give it to you in the first place, even though you're like, that's something that you should maybe do. That's just another example. I mean, there's a whole list, and there's a lot more out there, but it's a real thing, and it's a scary thing. And to go to the doctor and never have to worry about that, I think you're really lucky with that. So.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't have anything immediately to prompt more discussion from you guys. We're at about an hour, so we do have some time if you want to, but this is right about when we usually kind of get ready to end things. But I would most definitely love to have you guys involved in conversations in the future if you'd be willing to. Really appreciate you being on here tonight. And like I said, I'm kind of rolling with discussions as they come. I just really valued having a lot of different individuals share their perspectives. It's worth promoting to this group at the end of August. Church is going to be a part of, I think it's August 28th, Aviva. Do you remember that event? August 28th is when there will be I'm totally blanking on all the details of it, but there'll be an event down in Minneapolis where very near, even right on the spot that George Floyd was killed, to do some ministry to youth. There's churches down there that are really passionate about reaching out, making sure especially that the youth in that area are hearing that there are people that care about them other than just the Black Lives Matter movement, So anyway, we're gonna that will certainly be promoted from church, but as we have our own group here looking to keep building and addressing the racism issues, I would really just encourage all of you to see if you can be a part of that, so we can go down there and it'd be a good place to just start with something anyway. But we'll keep going with what God's got for us. There is another discussion next Thursday night at 7:00. And like I said, eventually, I appreciate a couple of questions that you guys sent in tonight. And if you have things that pop up via email, we will get to a spot here where I'd like to take some of the flip side of this conversation, so where we can share thoughts and questions and just be honest about and open about other thoughts that right now we're focused on listening, and in the future, but for healing and connection and bridge building, we need to make sure we can all kind of express any uncertainties we have and just sort through the mess of racism, and more pertinently sort through the mess of evil, I guess, is really what it is when it comes to, I think, maybe my last thought, and then I'll toss it back to Aviva and Anita if they want to share something else too. But I do think it's worth, when I was having this conversation with James early on and I talked about privilege, I really thought James said, it's worth repeating. The greatest privilege we have is simply being children of God and knowing that Jesus Christ died for us, and being adopted into his family is really the only privilege that we need, and it's above anything else we could ask for. And so in that regard, I want to keep focusing on that. And while we need to very much address the very real evil problem of racism, it should not supersede the truth of God's love when it comes to, I don't want racism dialogues to take away from expanding of God's kingdom. Here we are in the midst of all these terrible things happening. And so while racism needs to be talked about, we need above that be spreading the love of Christ every way, shape, or form that we can. And so I don't want to get so bogged down in that we are just talking all the time and not spreading God's love either. So we'll keep the racism dialogues going, but we will also find some ways to be active stuff too. So Anita and Aviva, any thoughts? Or again, we still got half an hour if you guys want to keep talking. I just wanted to.
It's funny. I was gonna just end by just saying, like, I think what I told Anita, like, our greatest privilege is like having the Holy Spirit on our side, just to say, like, there are so many times that, like, even me, I've caught myself saying or thinking something racist and I don't even catch it until it's already slipped out of my mouth or after I've already thought it. And I mean, that goes for other things too. Like, we don't really know, but we have the greatest privilege of having the Holy Spirit to say, that wasn't right. And just being in tune with him. And that goes again with like asking God to break your heart for what breaks his, because that would break his. And I know that for sure, just by like thinking things and just repenting and saying, like, God, going back and saying, God, why do I think that way? Why did I say that about them? Who put that in my head to say that? And God, remind me how you see them, so that I don't see them the way the world sees them. I see them the way you see them.
Just kind of with this whole thing, every day I'm grateful that this isn't something that we have to figure out alone. And again, she said we have the Holy Spirit. We have access to God to guide us through this process and through these conversations and through this weird and hard time. And I don't know, we just both kind of agreed that if any real change is going to happen, if we want to be impactful, if we want to be leaders of this, especially as a church, that Jesus needs to be right in the middle of it. And we can't sway or have him be less of it. He has to be directly in the middle and in the center of it all if we're going to see real things start to happen.
Absolutely. Amen. Well, Gary, we actually started at 6 tonight, so glad you jumped on at the very end here. But I keep alternating the start times just so people have variations in their evening schedule. But we are going to do it again next week at 7, and we have been loading it on the church YouTube channel now. So if you wanted to jump on and hear Anita and Aviva's perspective, it'll be up there shortly too. But otherwise, I'll close this in prayer, and then we'll just go here. So, Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for just the opportunity to talk. I do just want to, Anita and Aviva hit on it so powerfully tonight about really the focus is on you and seeking you and your peace. The world is full of evil and hate and division, and Lord, but when we're with you, it's love and it's peace and it's unity. And so we just pray, Father, that we have the privilege of being your children and knowing that, and the opportunity to just push in close to you and experience that. And so we pray that you would be glorified in the things that we do. We'd have opportunities just to spread your kingdom as it pertains to race. Lord, give us clarity and recognition of when we need to change our perspectives, and may we just be a part of loving individuals around us and be a part of the solution. I just pray that you would give Redeeming Love Church, especially as we have this unique spot in the city of St. Paul, Lord, that you would give us guidance and creativity about how we can make an impact for your kingdom here and with issues of racism, Lord. So blessings on everyone, and bring us all back safely. And we pray, amen.
Amen.
Yeah, so thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks again, Anita and Aviva. We are scheduled again next week, 7 o'clock. I actually don't have any speakers lined up yet, so maybe Anita and Aviva we'll do an encore maybe or something. But anyway, yeah, thank you guys. God bless you. We'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.